1.
Hi, I'm Jay Carter.
And I'm Krista Carter.
And you're listening to
Professional Ice.
Today on Professional Ice, we are doing IceFiction. We are going to be going over the screenplay that we wish existed for Willow, our favorite George Lucas film. Yes, we include Star Wars because, I'm sorry, but Willow is an instant classic. It can't not be the best.
Right. And of course, Willow was directed by another one of my favorite directors, which is
Ron Howard.
Ron Howard.
Another one of my favorite directors that I can't remember.
If they're not named Steven Spielberg, I can't remember their names.
I don't think anybody can remember their names.
It's just Steven Spielberg.
That's all.
It's just Steven Spielberg and Jim Jarmusch.
Oh my gosh, Krista, have you ever seen that document that like lays out the simplification of all concepts ever? Every person is the Johnsons. Every idea is math.
That's right.
Everything is either a box or a stick. Oh yeah. If you wanted to say my favorite movie was directed by Steven Spielberg, you would
because
say
that's
my favorite box was biked by the Johnsons.
No, it was
biking is the verb for everything.
It's the verb for everything.
Yes, my favorite box was biked by the Johnsons.
Biked by the Johnsons. No, but yeah, so pretty much it's like if you're not Steven Spielberg, then you're probably Ron Howard.
Yep.
So yeah, directed by Ron Howard, which was really great. And in the 90s when this movie was made, there was this resurgence of, it's like the Riverdance effect. Everybody wanted to hear stories that were vaguely or even explicitly about Ireland. So Ron Howard, I believe he's of Irish descent of some way, shape, or form. And so he made some Irish-flavored movies. And I would kind of say that this is one of those Irish-flavored movies, Jay. I think Willow,
I mean, when you get the Tuatha De Danann in a spell, and you have Elora Danann being a character, and you have Tir Asleen being the capital of a fairy kingdom. I mean, how can it not be Irish or at least Celtic or Gaelic?
Right.
Word?
Exactly.
So,
and that's part of what made it so great. I mean, there was redheads in this film. There was, trolls and fairies and really cool fairies, not just fairies, but like Fae fairies.
Krista, I want you to know that the only movie to have ever done fairies correctly, including all of the really great modern ones like Spiderwick Chronicles and other things like that, like Willow. Fairies are creatures made of magic.
Yeah.
They are literally composed of magic, and for them to be brilliant and shining and vaguely humanoid shaped, but not necessarily confined to that shape, like Willow was the inception of my concept of real fairies.
Right, along with Brian Froud, which we've already discussed. And there's a little bit of fairiness in The Dark Crystal, which, again, I'm just really super excited for, but
go ahead and take a look at our other video about the Dark Crystal, which is coming up here at the end of the month.
That's right. We're really excited about that, but I'll try and leave it out of it. It's just like, partially related because of the fairies. But no, there is a very specific fairy lore. There is fairy lore in different countries all over the world, and there's a very specific fairy lore in Ireland that's even different from England, although they do share, obviously being so close together, they do share a lot of the same types of lore. But I would almost feel like English fairy lore really comes from more of the Germanic tradition, and Ireland has its hardcore own Celtic Gaelic roots. Yeah,
like there is literally an entire religion around fairies. There is I would say edited is the way I would say, a well-edited book called The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, which goes into, it's like it's like the real version of fairy tales. It's a
Right.
person who went around. I think it's W.Y. Evans Wentz is the name of the guy who collected all these stories. He went around to all the Celtic countries and he just talked to people and he said, "What do you know about the Fae?" And it was great. They said, "Well, my brother saw out on the field one day a cow that was levitating 2 feet off the ground, and the next day the cow had been slaughtered and put on my doorstep as if some very kind, Fae creatures had come along and done me a service, and I went ahead and, left some milk out for them that night, and then they never came back." And it's like it's a thing that people believe.
Yeah.
And it was so great to kind of see that, and I love that spirit is held, sort of alive in the Willow series, where people are like, they know fairies exist.
Right. Like they just do. They do.
Yeah.
And they do. And that's what's great about that's what's great about Willow too, is that it's like built into the script. Like there's this part where, the brownies are like, stealing children and like the whole thing. Like the brownies are stealing the children and taking them into the wilderness, and they're being bossed around by other, there's this hierarchy of fairies. There are these other fairies that are controlling the other fairies, and then they go into town and like the brownies scamper along the floor, and like the woman says, I hate brownies. It's
I
just
hate
like
brownies, yes.
Like it's like, oh, I hate roaches. It's totally normal, and it's just really great. And if you like that type of stuff, if you like Irish traditions or talking about Irish people, Ron Howard's a great director. He also directed Far and Away, which starred like Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise when they were still married, where they were pretty much at the height of their careers, and that's all about Irish people immigrating to America.
I can't say that I prefer Tom Cruise's Irish accent, but the movie itself was good, and it had an interesting plot.
And Ron Howard's just a really great director. Didn't he also direct Cocoon? I think he did. Didn't he?
I feel like he must have.
It was when he was much younger, but yeah.
All directors are either Steven Spielberg or Ron Howard.
Or Ron Howard.
Because it wasn't Steven Spielberg.
But
Krista,
yes,
let's get down to it, shall we?
Yes, I would say this. We also want to mention what's his face who did Star Wars, who isn't Steven Spielberg,
George Lucas.
Because this is actually George Lucas's story.
It is George Lucas's script, and while we acknowledge that there were some books that were written to complement the movies, we will not be necessarily adhering to or nodding to those. This is sort of our cinematic universe for Willow begins and ends with the movie that Ron Howard directed.
Yes.
And we want to make sure that the concepts that were established in those films get some more breathing room. And I mean, Warwick Davis and Val Kilmer are an amazing duo.
I just wish I could see them again together. I just want to put all of them back together.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead. For those of you who are interested in following along, the object of IceFiction is to show you our creative process, because as writers, we both like the idea of doing things in a spontaneous kind of way, and we always end up having these amazing conversations about it offline, and we just want to bring it to you guys so that you can kind of see how things work. We're not going to claim that the way that we do things is better than anybody else would do them, but if you happen to see something that you think, oh, I could do something like that, cool, that's great. And if that inspires you in some way to write your own screenplays or stories, we've done our job. In the meantime, we're just going to have some fun doing our thing. If you want to follow along, we have a link to the document that we're using in the show notes. You can literally open that and see exactly what we're doing. Today, we're going to be transferring a lot of our notes down from the conversations that we've had previously and organizing them into a coherent outline so that we can kind of start building upon that. In future episodes of IceFiction where we cover Willow, we'll probably end up following that outline and coming up with a scene list, and then talking about thematically what we want to have happen in each of those scenes, what we want to accomplish with those scenes, and overall just sort of make a nice, smooth plot so that we can have a good finished product at the end. This will probably look a lot more like a story, like a short story.
Or in
a long story.
In the screenwriting industry, what we're doing is we're doing a beat sheet. It's called more of a beat sheet or a treatment. A treatment is usually 1 to 3 pages that describes in chunks, in paragraphs, what is happening in the film. Right. But I also, because I am a budding screenwriter myself, a lot of what I create is dialogue heavy. So I'll probably eventually want to push for like a full script. And I will say a full script, if it's a 2-hour movie, it's going to have about 200 pages. It's just 200 pages script-wise, which means there's a lot of space. So basically for every 1 minute of film, there's 1 page of script. So you have a short little description of what's happening in the scene, all the dialogue, and it's just really, really easy to read. And at the end, the screenplay should take as long to read as it takes to watch the film.
Right. Now, as a note, I am not used to screenwriting. I am more of a prose writer. I write novels. I write other short stories and things like that. So this is going to be a challenge for me because the screenplay is a thing that exists between an outline and a story. And so I'm going to be fighting the temptation to go full story and just write everything out in paragraph form.
Yeah. So, but that's what I'm here for. So while Jay is pulling up the document, I guess I'll let you know some of the background. He's switching over to there we go, the shared screen. You have to understand that we are putting this together for the onlines because Jay and I literally, I was like, hey, Jay, it's my birthday. We should outline Willow too. This is what we did. We get together on our days off and have fun talking about our fandom and what we're going to do. So this is why we decided we just got to share this on the IceCast because this is what we do in our spare time, and we have so much fun talking about it and geeking out about the world that we figured we'd share it with you guys. Okay, so Jay, you want to click back in?
So here we are up top. I'm going to be muting my microphone in and out so you guys don't hear me typing a whole bunch. But
unless you like typing sounds, in which you should say that in the comments whether or not you want us to include typing sounds.
Do you want us to include the typing sounds? You can't see me, but I'm making a face that's very excited right now. Okay, so the first item on our list of notes here is that we want to talk about fairies, and we want to talk about how they have like family or noble lines.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say, I might add, while you're doing that, which is funny because you aren't muting the typing.
Well, I'm giving them some okay. Like, I've already done the not muting. I wanted to show them what the typing sounds.
What the typing sounds. Okay, we'll give them a choice.
If you guys are totally ASMR and you guys want to hear the typing sounds,
I actually don't mind the typing. I just don't want it to get like super pound loud. So if you can anyway, I like light typing. It's like sewing machine sounds for me. I love it. So what we're doing, after talking about it for a while, what we realized was we had so much fun with the character of Bavmorda, and furthermore, she seems to be so powerful that we want to know how she came into power. Because that whole thing, I mean, she was hanging out with generals and stuff. It's like, what has Bavmorda been doing, and why is she so driven? And so we decided that we should go back and do a prequel and find out about this Bavmorda character and explore her more and see what she's like and how did she get to be such a powerful sorceress. But then, of course, we also wanted to do the sequel, and we thought, well, we couldn't leave Bavmorda out of it, really. So, yeah, we have a plan for the sequel, but I guess right now we're going to talk about the prequel, which we are calling Bavmorda because she's going to be, the original film was called Willow. So it was really the story of, Willow's little arc of becoming a becoming what is it, like the greatest wizard, right, Jay? It's the story of how Willow became a great wizard, right? Or
the most powerful sorcerer.
The most powerful sorcerer, not a wizard. My bad. There is a difference. I had to learn that the hard way several years ago. When you get into geek culture, it's like there is a difference between sorcerer and wizard. Okay. Are you trying to figure out how to spell Sherlindria?
Sherlindria.
I think it's Srilin. Because
Cher.
Oh, Sherlindria.
Sherlindria. Okay.
Like Sherlindrea.
Sherlindria.
Right. Although
IA. EA. Sherlindrea. There you go.
Drea. I will say, like, that is actually not an Irish or Gaelic spelling of it. If it was like Irish or Gaelic, it would be SRI. And I can't even spell the rest of it. I had to figure it out because I was looking up a lot of stuff.
Help me remember. My notes say FQ and FK married to unify FR.
Oh, it's the Fairy King and the Fairy Queen. Okay. So this is what we figured about Bavmorda. We decided that Bavmorda has fairy lineage. Didn't you and I talk about how fairy lineage people have red hair? We connected it with red hair, didn't we?
Yes. So in Celtic mythology, and just sort of like a general belief in the British Isles is that those who have red hair are descended from the Fae. In fairy tales specifically, they talk about how, like, changelings, for example, children who were stolen and replaced with a fairy child, that fairy child will have some one or two characteristics that does not look human, and part of that is that some part of their body might be red, like they have red fingertips or red, like they have slightly pointed ears, and that those ears are slightly red, that they might have red eyes or red hair. And so this is sort of just a general acceptance of that into the modern Irish heritage, saying, okay, well, if you have red hair, then you must be descended from the Fae, which we know that in Willow, Elora Danan had red hair,
yes.
And also Sorsha had red hair, and we wanted to kind of nod to that concept that there is a significance to the fact that they have red hair, that they're of Fae ancestry.
So let's start with Bavmorda then. We wanted to go back to when Bavmorda was what, like more of a late teens, early 20s sort of maiden stage Bavmorda? Or I can't remember, was she human or did we decide that she was Fae?
Okay, so the deal was Bavmorda is a normal human woman. The Fairy King and the Fairy Queen are supposed to marry one another. They're supposed to be joining the kingdom, but the Fairy King is like, I don't care. The Fairy Queen, in the meantime, is watching the human realm just for her own amusement and everything, kind of like Midsummer Night's Dream. But in the meantime, Bavmorda is like, look, if you don't care about the Fairy Queen, like, what if I became your queen and then I could inherit all of your fairy powers and become a powerful sorceress? And so she totally like,
right.
but this is like in the middle of her story. Early on, we find out that she's just like a court magician who's aspiring to be, to have as much power as she possibly can
in the human realm. So
yeah.
wasn't she involved in Tirasleen? This is another thing that I'm not completely sure of. Is Tirasleen supposed to be sort of the kingdom that has connections to Fae realm, and like the other realms are human realms that have human wars?
Okay, so we know that...
Was she in the court of Tirasleen is my question.
I can't remember. I think it must have been in here somewhere. I want to say Tirasleen was actually the fairy kingdom. I want to say that Nachmarr was a human kingdom.
I think
and
not.
That there was.
I want to say Nachmarr was, and that she conquered Nachmarr, and she just used the castle.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to just read all of my notes out loud and then mark them down so that we can kind of be on the same page here. So I'm actually going to pop back in. Hello.
Okay. Hi.
Okay, so we know that the Fairy Queen watches the human realm for entertainment. She sees, I have KOT, something, lose wife and child and falls for him.
King of, KOT would be King of...
King of Tears-Lean, maybe?
Possibly. Okay.
We'll figure that out here in a second. She watches this king, we'll assume, lose his wife and child, and she, the Fairy Queen, falls for him. Either she or he goes to Rizal for oracular advice. She says the union is blessed. She sees Shalindria's future against evil. Shalindria is then born. Okay. So
here we go. We went way far back.
Yeah, so Shalindria is born as a union between the Fairy Queen and the king of something.
Okay. Probably the king. If it's T, it's probably the king of Tears-Lean. There's nothing else.
Probably the king of Tears-Lean, yeah. Bavmorda kills her advisor mentor to claim power. She's exiled for murder. She goes to the Fairy King to bargain for magic. Bavmorda escapes
because the king. Yeah, she bargains for magic because she says, "I will get back at Shalindria," or no, because I will get back at the Fairy Queen because the Fairy Queen cheated on her Fairy King. I think it was a rivalry with Shalindria that got her in trouble. Right.
So Bavmorda escapes and attempts revenge for 12 years. She returns to the Fairy King for more power. The Fairy King strikes a deal for the conception of Sorsha. When Sorsha is 8 years old, she becomes the captain of Bavmorda's armies.
When she's 8?
Yeah, when she's 8.
Oh, okay.
Because she's a freaking fairy child.
Yeah, okay.
Who is the daughter of Bavmorda. So
yeah, I remember we had this whole conversation about how I really wanted to focus on Sorsha more because I felt like Sorsha got a bum rap, but she just does nothing but fail her mother, and then in the end she holds a baby. Like what?
But basically, so this all goes back, like the whole concept behind our prequel, behind the Bavmorda prequel, comes from the meaning of the name Bavmorda, which is bad mother.
Right.
The whole idea is that she gets into being a mother for totally the wrong reasons. Mm-hmm. Like she's like, I want power, Fairy King, and the Fairy King's like, okay, have my kid, and she's like, fine, whatever it takes to have power. I just want the power. Mm-hmm. And so when she has the kid just kind of grows up following her mother around and learning all of the stuff that she's doing, and eventually Bavmorda's like, look, make something useful of yourself. Go be you know how to fight. I've been training you in magic. You know how to do all this stuff. Go be the leader of these armies. You're not doing anything else useful around here. Go be something.
But clearly at the time of Willow, though, she is clearly either not enabled with magic, or she has like shunned her training in magic because she didn't get a
whole lot of magical training. Like that's probably why she has this I need to please my mother complex, because she didn't learn magic very well. Mm-hmm. And so since she never picked up on it, Bavmorda was like, well, you're totally useless. Go lead the army if you can't do magic.
Either that, or maybe I don't know. We'll have to talk about that. Anyway, go back to that 8-year-old.
Bavmorda and Sorsha invade clans. They gain power. They issue an ultimatum to the Nachmarr kingdom. Mm-hmm. Nachmarr concedes, provides Kale as a general, as an allied general, as part of the treaty. Kale's army, of course, and also they say have some necromancy.
Because because necromancy.
Yeah, because necromancy. So at this point in time, Nachmarr is already practicing necromancy, and necromancy and fairy magic are two different things.
Right. So Bavmorda adds necromancy to her sorcery.
Yeah, to her arsenal.
To her fairy sorcery, so she ends up gaining even more power.
Right. So Bavmorda, Sorsha, and Kale invade Tears-Lean. joined by the Fairy King, they banish the Fairy Queen, who is now married to the King of Tirzleen. Kill the King of Tirzleen. Kill, and I have here SL and F Bro.
Shalindria.
Kill Shalindria, and
Shalindria's brother, I guess. I don't know.
Finn Rizal's brother. Finn
Rizal's brother. Because
Probably.
We have to have some sort of a problem between Finn Rizal. Yes. Okay, so Rizal was a sorceress who lived in Tirzleen?
I want to say that Rizal, Shalindria, and Bavmorda were all contemporaries. Like, they were all about the same age. So Rizal was an oracle, is what our notes say.
Oh, okay. Rizal was an
oracle. And she said that the union between the Fairy King and between the Fairy Queen and the King of Tirzleen was a blessed union. She sees Shalindria's future and foretells that it's going to oppose evil. So apparently Finn Rizal is slightly older than Shalindria and Bavmorda, but Shalindria and Bavmorda are supposed to be the same age.
Right. So okay. So let's make a quick note here. Let's just put a little pin in Shalindria, because Shalindria is right. She's a fairy princess. She's the daughter of the Fairy Queen, and we could consider her essentially, I mean, as she is fairy royalty and also fae. So this is a really important thing that we wanted to say, because this little thing about how fae are you and what happens in terms of death. This is a really important thing, because this is what we use as a hinge for the sequel, which is if you're fae, when you die, your body dies, but you have...
Well, yeah, so your ancestry matters about what happens when you die. So when you die, if you are a human, you have a quote-unquote an immortal spirit, and that immortal spirit then goes to the spirit world or whatever. But if you are at least partially fae, if you're entirely fae, there's no spirit to die. There is only a fae will, and that fae will encapsulates all of your personality as a fae being. And if you die in the mortal realm, your fae will just recedes back into the fae realm. But if you are half and half, you technically have both, but the fae will pulls the spirit into the fae realm, so you don't technically go to the afterlife.
Right. There isn't an afterlife for fae.
Right. So because Bavmorda made this, we'll get to that in the sequel, but spoilers for the sequel of Willow. When Bavmorda gets exiled at the end of Willow, she, because of her bargain with the Fairy King, he then pulls her into the fae realm. So her spirit, via the necromancy, her spirit has been consigned to oblivion in the netherworld, but her fae nature, which is always a part of, it's just not, because in humans it's just not active. Everybody has a fae will. It's not. Yeah. So, but that basically what that does is it splits her into two.
Let's briefly define the fae will. Fae will is an energy that is connected to nature. Period.
Yeah. So the idea is that magic. You got to go back to the sort of what is magic. Magic is the potential for all energy and matter in the material world. So, because it exists as potential, that means it can take any shape, it can become anything. All of matter and energy that we experience in the mortal world is essentially just hardened magic. It's solidified potential.
Right.
So when somebody dies, that potential, their body, of course, decays and goes away, but everything else that's part of who they were before they became a material being continues to exist. It's just mostly caught up in the immortal spirit if you're human, or the fae will if you're a fairy.
So wait a minute, were we saying that Bavmorda is 100% human? And if she is, then she has an immortal spirit. That spirit is gone.
But that spirit got...
But her will... But so humans have also a piece of energy that's connected to nature.
Yeah.
And what the Fae King did was he took that will when she died.
Yes. So it goes like this. There are 5 levels of corporeality. It starts with intelligence. Intelligence when acquiring emotive properties.
Can I also say what is the source for this? This is your own.
This is my personal interpretation
from the
everything
Encyclopedia Fantastica by J. Carter III.
So once upon a time, I attempted to write an entire encyclopedia about every mythological creature that ever existed. That's still sort of a thing, but it only exists in my head. But basically, through all of the research that I've done over the course of decades upon decades.
And this is research of fun stories, but also actual literature and folk tales.
Like, we're talking about folk tales from the Brothers Grimm. We're talking about the myths of Greek and Roman mythology, of Chinese and Japanese mythology. I'm less well-versed in the Asian mythologies, but they were still part of my formative sort of understanding of what all this is. There's some just general German stuff in there. There's a lot of Celtic.
There's religious, there's
there's
pagan, Christian, lots of different stuff.
Like what happens to the soul after death? What do different religions say about it? Is reincarnation a thing? It also sort of comes from both the historical and the fantastical views of like druids, and what a druid is, what magic is, etc. So like so Harry Potter figures in there, all of the everything, all of the fandoms that I've ever been exposed to, on top of all the historical stuff, on top of all of the fantastical stuff, gets essentially compiled and broken down.
And cross-referenced in your brain.
Yeah. So as best I can tell, it comes down to this. First, the lowest level of
corporeality.
An individual's identity is the intelligence. That's the ability to discern one thing from another. There isn't a whole lot else that it can do. But because it can do that, it can learn. There isn't any structure or framework for acting on its surroundings. In fact, it has no surroundings because it's just an intelligence. It just acquires information and stores it and analyzes it. This is where we might think of, like, if a wizard, for example, were to summon an elemental, everything that exists, all matter, has intelligence. And so the wizard isn't creating something that didn't exist before. He's just awakening the intelligence that already exists in that matter and asking it to move around. Jinn, Marids, Shaitan, other sort of genies type creatures are similar to this, except that they're more advanced. They're not the rudimentary elementals that you might find, like just an earth elemental that climbs up out of a hill or something like that. This is like almost primordial beings that have been around since the beginning of time, which is why they're so wise and everything.
Which is probably why they're really jaded too.
Yeah. And so
Jinn are so over it.
Yeah. So Jinn, being elemental creatures, they have all of. In fact, the word. This is one of the reasons why I come down to this conclusion. The word genie comes from the word genius, which itself essentially means intelligence. And so this is why I've come down to this sort of. One of the reasons why this is the way I view it. So intelligence comes first. Then, of course, you have the will, the ability to feel something about what you know or what you discern, to have preferences, to say, I like this, I don't like this. This is one of the reasons why fairies are so jealous, why they're so emotional, why they can only contain one emotion at a time. That was
because they are of that. They are will. They are made out of it. That's what their bodies. That's their corporeality. That's what their bodies are made out of.
They are the definition of limitless. They have no boundaries. They don't prevent themselves from doing anything. It's like if your most extroverted friend got drunk and also high at the same time. That's a fairy right there. Like everything that you see or feel is right on the surface, like a raw nerve. Anyway, so the fairies then are essentially, any Fae creature is identical in terms of genetic makeup because there's no genes. It's all magic. But the second they get pooped out into the material world, reality has to shape them into something. And so they resolve as all these different creatures. There's fairies, goblins, dwarves, elves, gnomes, everything that you think of when you think of a fae creature, like in like a D&D game or something like that. Right. They're all made of the same stuff. They're just different expressions of magic within the material plane. So then, of course, you have, after intelligence and the fae will, you have the spirit. The spirit is where the individual begins to acquire this this sense of limitation, this sense of self-management, of self-awareness. This is the seat of devotion. If they say, I regard this concept or power more greatly than my own, I esteem or respect this thing as superior to what I may want, this is where you then get like religion. This is where you get gods. This is where you get people who are followers of a god, who are children of a god. This is like the foundation of what it means to be a child. There isn't any family in the fairy realm, whereas with spirit there are beings of a kind when it comes to spirit.
So when we say daughter, when we say fairy child, or even like there might be the king and the queen, and they might be married, but it's like it's a fairy marriage. It's right. They're playing. It's more like it's a game. They're playing marriage. They are playing hierarchy. They are playing at it
because they see humans do it.
Right.
And because they think that's so cool. Like a fairy basically is watching all of the more advanced creatures live out their lives and think, oh, well, I can be that too.
Which is why
I'm a king. I can have a king.
Well, I'm a king. So they might seem very sophisticated, and the ironic thing is that they're actually pretty powerful. I mean, in terms of the fact that they can move energy and make things happen. But
they are raw potential. So
they're very capricious, but they're also I'm assuming that at each level of corporeality, you kind of have the ability to sort of control or master the one underneath you.
Yeah, and exactly.
So they can use the elements, but that's what that's all they can use. They can use the elements.
So the 5 levels of corporeality suggest that whenever you acquire a new corporeality, a new stage of corporeality, it means that you are immediately superior to anything that has less corporealness than you do.
Right. So backing up, let's go on to like soul. So you have what? A spirit?
So you have intelligence, the Fae will, the immortal spirit, and then finally you receive the mortal body. The mortal body is composed of material elements and energy. And these have been solidified. Essentially, at the beginning of time, the clock was wound, and the potential for matter and energy was essentially packed in to this one sort of telling of the story, so to speak. And like somebody hit the play button, and everything started to unfold the way, however it would. It was all chaos at the beginning, and as time went on, everything followed everything obeyed its sort of code and started to develop as it would. The matter responded how matter was supposed to, the energy responded how energy was supposed to, and everything kind of reacted against itself until finally you had humans being developed. But these humans ended up having, different than most other forms of creation, ended up having those immortal spirits that were unique to them. Of course, other animals have immortal spirits too, and so they, again, of a kind, the animal spirits became animal.
But the animals have a body, though. That's the thing. It's like that's what makes an animal is that it has an animal's immortal soul and an animal body.
Sure.
Just like the human animals have a human animal body and a human animal immortal soul.
Spirit.
Yes.
Now, here's the funny thing that starts to happen. Now that the material world exists, it starts to bleed with the other ones, right? So because the spirits have to come from somewhere, automatically there's this open door for the immortal spirits to come into the mortal realm. Well, what happens when they die? They go right back. Same thing can happen from spirit world to Fae, where the spirits are being formed out of the Fae will and become spiritual matter. The spirits can blend right back into the Fae realm. Here's the hiccup. Because you have intelligence, Fae, spirit, then matter, you have to actually jump one of the levels of corporeality to get from the Fae into the material realm, which is why fairies are so transient. If they find a way to make it into the material realm without getting that middle bit, without getting the spirit bit, they essentially shortcut the process and become something that reality has to justify in some way, which is why it presses them into these physical forms, whatever part they're playing in the game at that moment. That's what makes them this thing. You know, they're little humans with wings because they wanted to be humans, because a lot of them want to be humans, because they watch and they see all these humans having fun, and they're like, oh, I want to be that, but I also want to have wings. Like, it's the ultimate like child coming up with their like, what superpower would you have? Well, I'm gonna fly, but I'm also gonna breathe fire, and I'm gonna have like middle hand, and this is fairies to a T. So they come in and they're able to, where the boundary gets fuzzy, that's where this crossover can happen. So fairies are very much about the liminal world, about spaces in between, like doorways and arches and walls and windows, and like the edge of a forest where a plain and a forest meet, and like crossing over from one place to the other symbolically happens
thresholds.
In reality. Yeah, the thresholds.
Which is why, which I might also add, which is also why traditions, it's interesting because, you know, the folk traditions in the British Isles, they will put things on the threshold. On the threshold of the house, but also like at the fireplace too, at the hearth, which is also kind of a threshold, but it's a threshold for like the fire to leave. Whereas the door is for things to go in and out of. So yeah, thresholds. They guard. But it's funny. It's like you got to be. It's like you need to please the fairies so that they don't
mess with you.
They don't mess with you. But on the other hand, if like it's like they can bless you, but they can also like steal your children, and it doesn't matter.
Right. So here's the thing.
They're like, oh, what game are we playing now? You know?
Right. So because Fae don't have corporeal forms, they don't have the ability to have children, they don't have spirits, and therefore they don't know what it means to be of a kind. And so they feel this overwhelming lack where the cosmos, the levels of corporeality essentially dictate that they don't get that. They don't have families. And so that's one of the things that they covet about humans so much. And so to sort of, that's why in Labyrinth, the Goblin King wanted to steal the baby, because he could never have one of his own, because he was a Fae. And so that's why the Fae come in and they steal children, because they want to bring them back into the fairy world so that they can have families of their own. In the meantime, however, they also see the injustice of stealing a child, and so they think, well, I'll trade you. Right. You can have the thing that I made that looks like a baby, and I'll just take your baby. Fair trade. You know, again, thinking like a child. This is what makes sense to them. So in the meantime, the human that has been now drawn back into the Fae realm, that Fae will in them starts to awaken, and the longer they're in the Fae realm, which automatically doesn't follow the same constraints of time because it's not part of material creation, it starts to pull that out of them, and they essentially awaken as Fae. If they ever then return to the material realm, they're essentially never not Fae ever again. And this is where you do get that like Fae blood kind of thing. Like the only way that you can have someone born with Fae heritage is if their ancestor passed into the Fae realm and came back.
It's changing their energetic signal forever, which ends up changing your energetic signal, I think, would eventually affect the genes. And I think that you could possibly pass it through the genes.
And again, it's because the material realm has to justify it, has to rationalize what happened. And so when you come in as an awakened Fae from the Fae realm, but you're also human, it's like, well, I can't make you any more real. You're already real, so I guess you just get Fae blood.
Right.
So reality just justifies your Fae nature by saying it's in your blood now.
Was there a fifth level?
Yes, and I'll get to that in just a second. The other thing that happens when the fairies leave a child behind is that, again, like any other Fae, because it's being justified into a shape, that shape isn't necessarily bound because it's only magic. It's not partial human. It's only magic.
Right.
And so this is why those creatures, the changelings, can then grow old very quickly because nothing is stopping them from growing old.
Right.
And the more a fairy uses its magic, the more a changeling essentially operates as if it were Fae in the material world. It slowly gets drained away until finally it just becomes this withered old husk. And then, of course, it disappears and vanishes into, a number of leaves and sticks or what have you, because, again, the material is trying to explain the way that this fairy came into the world and the way it leaves. But while it's alive, if the Fae is very careful and doesn't go out of its way to, use its magic a lot, it can survive almost indefinitely. And this, in my opinion, is where those long-lived elf races come from.
Right.
Because they're very conservative about how much they use their magic, and so they never die. And that's also why they try to master the magic that already exists in the material or the natural realms, because then they can continue to be Fae at heart and use magic without having it compromise their immortality.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on to the fifth level of corporeality. If so far we have intelligence, the Fae will, the immortal spirit, the material body, the mortal body, finally the last one is glory. Now, I've struggled a lot with how to define this one in a single word, and I feel like glory makes the most sense. Here's why. It's because this is where gods come from.
Right.
When you perish, your spirit and your body separate from one another, and the spirit carries with it all of the identity information from all the previous levels of reality. The body at that point is just an empty shell. It has no connection to who you once were. Once you are reunited with your spirit and your body are reunited, and then perfected in whatever form that you happen to be in at that moment, that is who you become as an eternal force. And so, for example, this is where you get gods of nature, where if you are very closely connected with your natural, with the natural world, if perhaps you were an awakened Fae, you die, you come back, whatever it is, whatever process that reunites you with your body, whoever you are at that moment gets amplified and becomes essentially a force that exists in the universe from there on out. Most of the time, when we speak religiously, people that end up dying and coming back end up sort of not really living on the same plane of existence as the mortal world anymore, and so that's why you don't really see those kinds of gods just hanging around doing their thing. Most of the time, eternity can't, the mortal realm can't contain enough eternity for them to exist. Right. And so the only thing they can do, it's like
they just visit every now and then.
Yeah.
And if you need to come back, you come back in a body, and there's probably there's probably a whole other set of rules. If we're, because that also gets into stuff like what's in the Bhagavad Gita, what's in the pantheon of Greece. Maybe we could even talk about Jesus as a character. If we were going to say that there, that's the demigod thing, half God, half human. See, then there's half God, half human instead of half Fae, half human.
So there's something else to keep in mind as well. When who you are, when your essence becomes amplified and eternal, it depends on whether how you, for lack of a better term, whether you're good or evil on the alignment scale. Those of you who play role-playing games know what I mean. If you're very, very good and you represent that as a force, as an eternal force, you would probably become a god of that sort of thing. the way I write about it in my own stories is in terms of light or darkness. And when we say light or darkness, I don't personally attach any kind of goodness to light or evil to darkness. Mm-hmm. It just simply is what it is. Light is about knowledge, is about revelation, is about essentially open communication. Light itself is information. Whereas darkness is about pushing all of that away, about what is left in the absence of light. It's about keeping secrets. It's about having about one's movements or actions not being known or understood to those around you. And there are both good and bad things that one can do with both of those things. Mm-hmm. And so if you are an eternal being of light, that might make you an angel. If you are an eternal being of darkness, that might make you a demon. But what about the middle? What if you're not necessarily attached to any one of those concepts? What do you become then? And I have, again, my own stories have their own explanation for that. But in my mind, like, the generic thought is that they're not strong enough in any one thing to become full-on gods, which is what makes them just very powerful divine beings.
Right.
So, So once
I was gonna say, like,
permanent.
Right. So that's what we're working with. We're essentially pulling from your encyclopedia in your brain that you refuse to write down for right now, because there's enough reference books out there right now. I understand. So that's what we're working with, and I think it's important for us to define that, because that is what we are basing this entire plot around. May I add, from my own research as a collegiate writer and studying literature, especially folk literature, at a higher level, it's like this liminality, this moving in and out, back and forth. It's this idea of how death is a liminal experience. The whole birth and death thing. It's like you're not really dying; you're transforming. This is something that is a very old Celtic idea, Celtic, Gaelic, that area of the world, especially in Irish lore specifically. They visited the idea of death a lot, and they visited it in this, like, there's this traditional song, for instance, that I really like, the artist Lorena McKenna. She's a singer that was popular in the 90s, and she used a lot of stuff from Celtic lore, because that's actually a big deal. There was a lot of folks like that who settled in Canada, etc. But she would sing old poetry, and there was, old poetry, old stories about how, these, I can't remember exactly, but it's like these two sisters, like one sister was jealous of the other, and so and the other sister couldn't swim, and so she pushed her into the water, and she died and turned into a swan. Right. Like, that's what we're talking about. That's the type of lore that happened. Right. It's like she pushed her into the water, she died and became a swan. And then that swan was killed by a she was killed by a hunter, and then the bones of the swan became a harp, and then that harp was taken to the king's hall and started singing about how she was killed by her sister. Right. That is what we're looking at here. That is the lore. That's right. That is the lore that we're dealing with. And so because of that, it's appropriate, culturally speaking, to have this story where nobody ever really dies, and they just sort of keep being shifted back and forth until they're neutralized, because they don't ever really go away, because everything always transforms into something else, and everything always and if there's anything, it's like whatever gets carried with you is just the story of you. Right.
So one more thing I want to point out, because we're going to be heading back into the screenplay here in a second. Right. the idea of this transformation, this endless kind of becoming something new, something that will become very important over the course of the movies that we plan to write, is that when a creature, when a human is able to awaken its Fae will by visiting the Fae realm and then come back, or if they receive like that Fae heritage in some way by being the child of a Fae union, that basically marks their soul to rejoin their the magical flow of the Fae realm when they die.
Right.
When a human spirit, an immortal spirit, is able to rejoin the Fae realm after death, they automatically have something on any other Fae creature, and that is an immortal spirit.
Right.
So just out of that alone makes them essentially noble in the eyes of the Fae. So these Fae nobles who used to be human, awakened some kind of Fae will, and then died, essentially rejoin the Fae realm as nobility, and they then are able to manifest themselves. Think of it like a Force ghost from like Star Wars.
A Force ghost, yeah.
A Force ghost, like they're able to manifest themselves in the material world as spirit because they have one of those, where the Fae don't.
Right.
And so this is where Shalindria comes in Willow. She looks very different than most of the other Fae. That's because she's a Fae, a daughter of Fae blood, and she is a noble among Fae, and so she is so highly regarded that she essentially becomes a queen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we're setting up here, is that she is the birth of a Fae union. That's why she becomes a Fae noble. That's why she appears to Willow the way that she does. Mm-hmm. That's why she is different than the faeries. That's what makes her unique.
Right. Yeah. So, okay. So let's come back to we've got about 10 minutes left, Jay. Let's wrap up what we were doing.
So I'm going to go ahead and switch back over to the doc.
Okay. So we're going to wrap up the notes if you want to do a rundown.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just speed read through the rest of these because I feel like that'll put our brains in the right place.
I agree.
So anyway, so Bavmorda, Sorcia, and Kale invade Tir Asleen. They joined by the Fairy King. They banish the Fairy Queen back to the Fae realm. They kill the King of Tir Asleen. They kill Shalindria and Finrazel's brother, I think. Who I guess
I think this is what I think we had. It wasn't Shalindria's brother. It was whose brother?
I have the letter F followed by Bro.
So it would be Finrazel's brother.
Oh, no. Oh, I love it. This is her fairy brother. This is Shalindria's fairy brother, who was the result of a tryst. I have it down. Has child from tryst.
Okay, that's right. We were having all kinds of trysts.
Moving on. Razel curses Bavmorda. Bavmorda transforms and exiles Razel to the island.
Right.
Galadorn calls for an army to overthrow Bavmorda. Eric and Madmartigan, friends of rival clans, separate from one another. They're sort of mixed in all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Eric joins. I have Aven, maybe? Aven?
Sure. And then there was Owen. I serve.
Owen. Yes, Eric joins Owen. Madmartigan. I guess we had some notes, but I crossed those out for some reason. Okay, Bavmorda returns to Nachmarr. Madmartigan joins the mercenaries in battle against Nachmarr. Ends up in the crow's cage for no good reason. We went into that elsewhere. Madmartigan never shows up for the army of Galadorn. That's why he's labeled as a deserter.
Right.
So he's supposed to go with the army of Galadorn to oppose Nachmarr, but he decides to bugger off and join the mercenaries instead because he doesn't want to go up against Nachmarr because he doesn't want to die.
Right.
Meanwhile, I have down here F. Bro's lady bears fairy daughter to a peasant guy. FD, I'm not sure who FD is, grows up a peasant, knows prophecy, marries and has child, Elora Danan. Oh, okay, so this is the Elora Danan line.
Yes.
This is where we get that, because Elora Danan is like Shalindria is like Elora Danan's aunt.
That's it. So because
so,
Elora Danan is the princess of Tir Asleen, she's actually of the line.
She's legitimately the inheritor of the nobility in Tir Asleen.
And is also Fae.
Yes, and she's also Fae. So, continuing with the notes, the Fairy King brings dogs of the hunt with him to Sorcia's war. The High Alduin knew Rizal, did the same kind of magic. He knew the prophecy, but didn't do much with the seers. Galador destroyed by Kale, where Eric was. Kale killed an ogre, received the skull as a blessing from a shaman, worked it into his armor, and other notable warriors then do the same as sort of an homage to this great victory by Kale. Mm-hmm. Madmartigan is from a clan near the Nelwyn village, which is why he ends up knowing who Nelwyns are, and of course, everybody from that clan ends up basically hating Nelwyns, which is why he calls them all Pecks. Madmartigan and Eric insult each other by saying how they'll kill each other over the course of time. Shalindria crafted her wand as an initiation into the Finn oracles. So Shalindria is studying under Rizal.
Under Finn Rizal, okay.
Under Finn Rizal, until, of course, Finn Rizal is transformed and banished. Right. Then Shalindria eventually becomes far more powerful than Finn ever was. Mm-hmm. And that's, of course, why she goes looking for Shalindria's wand. Mm-hmm. Rizal's wand was destroyed by Bavmorda in the duel. We wanted to touch on a couple of other things in the movies. One is the saying, your touch is worth 100,000 deaths. We wanted to make that a literal thing. Sorsha probably is responsible for, directly or indirectly, 100,000 deaths, actual deaths.
No, because he says, Madmartigan says your touch is worth 100,000 deaths.
Right. Yes,
we'll have to rethink that, but yes, I would like to.
The irony we wanted to pick up on was that she's probably responsible for actually 100,000 deaths, and so her touch is indeed worth 100,000 deaths.
Oh, okay. So we wanted to. It was ironic.
Yes.
Okay.
And then, of course, you have Eric saying, "You've always told me you serve no one." We want to bring that back, where Madmartigan finally decides to not serve the army of Galadorn, and he goes off with the mercenaries. Where there's this moment with Eric and Madmartigan where he says, "You serve Galadorn," and then of course he says, "I serve no one."
Right. So what we have in Bavmorda, the movie Bavmorda, is she's the main character, but we have this subplot that ends up happening as we see the progression of Sorsha, because we have to follow Sorsha and Madmartigan. So what we see are younger versions of them that are like in their... How old would you say they were? Probably in their 30s?
They were
early 30s?
Young. Well, because remember that Sorsha was leading the army as of like the age of 8. And she's how old? Early 20s when Willow happens?
No, I would say she's late 20s when it happens.
Okay,
I would put them in early 30s. So if that's the case, then it would have been their mid-20s during Bavmorda. Yeah. Maybe Sorsha was a little younger, but she was exceptionally precocious because she was the daughter of Bavmorda. She grew up too fast. Way too fast.
Well, and she's also Fae.
Right.
So she's going to be doing things a little bit differently than most people because she's freaking Fae. Okay, then you've got, at some point, Eric has a girlfriend who goes to Madmartigan, who is totally into her, but couldn't care less. And then Eric thinks that Madmartigan stole her away. Mm-hmm. And the reason we wanted to set this up was because there is a parallel where Madmartigan, quote-unquote, steals Sorsha.
Okay.
Because he abducts her and removes her from the camp. And then, of course, after defeated by...
Madmartigan is kind of a bad guy.
He's kind of a bad guy, yes. After defeated by the Duke, Bavmorda appeals to the Fairy King with no response, gives up her fairy magic, and only uses necromancy from there on out.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's all of our notes. So I'm going to go ahead and write all those down in the doc. We won't take any more of the video time because it'll just be me writing.
Yeah, and this has been a good discussion. I think, I think this ended up being an essential discussion because as we're moving forward, we're going to be talking about more of these themes of transformation and balance of energy and just really that's what the Willow was all about. I mean, the original film Willow, it was just... It was about Willow. It was just about him. It's this hero's journey of how a small person can make a big change and how he grew as an individual, which we'll have to discuss whether or not the Nelwyns are Fae or if they're just little people.
I don't think they are.
I don't think they are just either.
Small people.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think this was a really necessary conversation to have, because when you're going to set humans in a magical setting, you need to decide what that world is. And I kind of wonder if, what's his name, who is not Steven Spielberg?
Ron Howard.
No, not Ron Howard.
George Lucas.
Hashtag not Steven Spielberg. George Lucas, you know, I wonder if he kind of did something similar to Star Wars, where it's like he had a really great idea. It was just a hero's journey story.
Yeah.
And he's really good at like dropping you in the middle of a world. Mm-hmm. But there's not much thought. Yeah. But there's so many elements, and the world feels so real. He's so good at making it feel so real that when the fans start to dig into it, they have to create all of these rules around it, which is what happened with Star Wars. And I just don't think that Willow got properly treated. And I think it could be just as comprehensive as Star Wars.
I think one thing that happened was that George Lucas does a wonderful job of suggesting the rules upon which the world is built.
Right. And then you have to justify whatever he did.
Right, which is great for somebody like myself who loves writing about stuff that people have already made. Like, that's a fan fiction writer's dream.
Exactly.
But one of the great things about that then is that there's so much to work with, and there's so many different options to justify all of it. Like, we know that fairies exist. What is Sherlindria? Where does she come from? Right. Justifying the fact that she looks different than every other fairy is part of our task.
Even though it was probably just random filmmaking to begin with.
Yeah.
Now we get to create reasons for it, and that's what's so fun.
I feel like what you and I intend, maybe not we're going to get there, but what we intend is to sort of do for Willow what this new Age of Resistance is going to do for the Dark Crystal. It's going to expand on what already exists. It's going to do justice to the source material. It's going to make everything feel more epic and complete in a way that basically the initial... it's going to make the initial... well, I shouldn't say that. I don't want it to be like offensive or anything to the original material, but like what they had available to them at the time, and also the fact that they were introducing a new idea forced them to be economical about how much they said, the way that they said it, the way that they expressed it. What I hope is that what we can come up with makes the original Willow feel like a short movie.
Yeah, like it was done on purpose. Like it
was just like a teaser trailer. Like I want to make the first Willow feel like a teaser trailer for everything that comes afterward.
Yeah, so. and everything that came before it too. And I just, to conclude, because we're out of time, but just to put a button on that, it's a testament to the amazing filmmaking of George Lucas. And also Ron Howard, the storytelling ability. That's right. Hashtag not Steven Spielberg. George Lucas really is a genius at that, because he was able to pack all of that into this beautiful little film and inspire all of this wonderful imagination. And that in and of itself is just it's a sign of tremendous talent. And I love what George Lucas does. I know people have criticized him for his own franchise, but this is just great. Jay, this was a good conversation.
Okay, good job. More Willow development next time on IceFiction.
IceFiction, that's right. And check all the show notes so that you can get a
If you're following along, be sure to check. I'll go ahead and, like I say, upload these notes, and you can look at those. Probably by the time you watch this video, they'll be available. Right. So,
all on Google. Okay, Jay, it was fun. We'll see you next time on IceFiction.
Bye.
Bye.